I talk a lot about gut health, and part of the reason is because I suffered with actually a lot of chronic gut issues. So here I am in the world of bodybuilding. I'm like the epitome of fitness on the cover of all these magazines. And honestly, everyone was looking at me as like, this girl is like complete health. And at first I started to have hormonal imbalances. My thyroid took a massive hit, which, makes sense when we're in this really low energy intake. Our metabolic system really starts to slow down. So it started with that, had a lot of depression, anxiety, was freezing cold all the time. And then I ended up with a lot of these gut issues. It was completely devastating at that point. And if you've ever experienced like gut issues, it affects everything in your life.
Rachel Scheer, welcome to the Keto Kamp Podcast.
Thank you so much for having me on. It's great to be here.
I'm grateful to have you here, and I'm curious, how does a girl from a small town of Minnesota, correct, go from being on the cover of fitness magazines and now being one of the top health and fitness influencers in the world? How does that happen?
Wow, that is definitely a loaded question. Yes, born and raised in Minnesota. I actually grew up as an athlete. I was a gymnast, I was a dancer. So fitness, athletics was always something that was incredibly important to me. But I'm going to be completely honest. Like, I grew up eating like complete crap. I grew up eating like McDonald's, like stored Halloween candy. And part of it was just because I had like zero parental supervision as a kid. And, that kind of goes into a whole nother story about just like my childhood and the way that I was raised. But I could literally eat whatever I wanted, and whatever I wanted as well too. So literally like a lot of my food growing up was just like complete trash. But I was an athlete, and that kept me relatively in good shape. And then I moved with my family actually to Texas when I was 16. So when I moved to Texas, I got more into dance. I was on varsity dance team, and I was always really, really fascinated by nutrition. And I decided to actually go to Baylor University for nutrition science and dietetics. And I didn't really know a whole lot at the time when it came to nutrition. I thought I was just going to learn more about like the athletic performance side of everything. And even in college, I probably still wasn't very, very healthy at the time. But actually, that's when I got into more of bodybuilding. So I was never good enough of an athlete to be like a professional dancer or gymnast or anything like that. So I go off to college, gained the freshman 15. And then while I was studying nutrition at Baylor, that's when I was actually dating a guy who was into bodybuilding, and I picked up weightlifting. And that's really where that like fitness freak that a lot of people see now today, that was on the cover of like Train magazine, bodybuilding.com, like really came to life. And I got into fitness competitions. I did bodybuilding for 3 years, NPC bikini shows. And I was actually known for quite some time as Rachel Scheer, six-pack abs, and like that was literally like the name that was given to me, like plastered all over these magazines. And I just was known as someone who could like maintain this like incredible physique for so long. So it started off as just like this venture of like getting fit and healthy. And honestly, the way I grew up had a big role with that. I grew up with, like I said, very little parental supervision. And for me, fitness was completely an outlet to escape a lot of like the things that I went through, the things that I experienced, and a lot of that trauma. So I almost took it to a little bit of the extreme later on, which I'm sure we'll dive into a little bit here today. But that's what really started me in the world of fitness and bodybuilding. It was an outlet for me. It was a way for me to really see what my body was capable of. I was an athlete, but I had really never experienced anything like bodybuilding and getting to that epitome of physique. It was something that I am incredibly like proud of today, but also it's also allowed me to look at health in a completely different way.
It's an amazing story, very inspiring. And I know that you were doing all these things on the cover of magazines, you were getting really well known in the space, and then all of a sudden things kind of came to a screeching halt. And you were at a moment where you were about to go to an appointment to actually get your entire large intestine cut out, and you were actually going to go through with it, but something happened that changed. So let's start right there. What led to that point? Why did you have to even make that appointment? And then what changed at that moment?
Yeah, so if you guys follow me on social media, I talk a lot about gut health, and part of the reason is because I suffered with actually a lot of chronic gut issues. So here I am in the world of bodybuilding. I'm like the epitome of fitness on the cover of all these magazines. And honestly, everyone was looking at me as like, this girl is like complete health. But as I got into bodybuilding, I realized that like, this really wasn't health, being at like this extreme low body fat percentage. And although I looked physically fit from the outside, I was very much miserable on the inside. And don't get me wrong, it started as a completely healthy venture of just like seeing what I was capable of, which I think it is for a lot of people. But it was actually kind of as I got more into competing that my health started to really deteriorate. And at first I started to have hormonal imbalances. My thyroid took a massive hit, which, makes sense when we're in this really low energy intake. Our metabolic system really starts to slow down. So it started with that, had a lot of depression, anxiety, was freezing cold all the time. And then I ended up with a lot of these gut issues. And, we talk a lot about like gut issues, IBS and the severity of it, like, okay, I have an upset stomach. I feel a little bit bloated. Mine were pretty severe. Mine was severe in terms of like every time I ate, I was in massive pain. I went to a bunch of different doctors. I did every scan. I did MRI, CT scan, CT, colonoscopy, endoscopy. I even went to the Mayo Clinic. And I was prescribed a bunch of different medications. Here's birth control for your hormones. Here's some thyroid medication. Here's, take this probiotic, which nothing wrong with probiotics. Take these laxatives. But like, it was all just Band-Aids to what was really underlying and what my health issues were. So eventually, I'm at this gastroenterologist office, and my gut is so impaired, like the motility, meaning like the transit of food through the gut, my gut was like almost like non-existent. So they sent me to a colorectal surgeon's office, and it was at that point where they wanted to actually cut out my entire large intestine because, hey, we can't use the restroom. That's terrible for your health. So they wanted to literally cut out the large intestine, where they sew the small intestine to the rectum. I know a lot of details, but that was the solution for fixing a lot of my gut issues. And I know not so sexy from coming from being, on the cover of like bodybuilding magazine and train and, being a bikini competitor. And now I have all of these like gut issues. And for me, I felt like I was completely betrayed by my body. Health, fitness for my life had been like, what I had been focused on. I put all my identity in that. And now I'm experiencing all of these health issues. I'm a nutritionist, and someone's telling me that I have to get my entire large intestine removed. It was completely devastating at that point.
And how long was that process of going on medication, trying different things? How long did you decide until you got to that point where you had to make a decision on surgery or not? How long did you do that for?
Yeah, so that was probably about 2 years that kind of went
Wow.
on for. Yeah. Yeah.
That's that's a long time to go through that struggle.
Yeah, and if you've ever experienced like gut issues, it affects everything in your life. And, when I talk about gut issues online, I get a lot of people who reach out to me, and I'm always surprised by how many people do suffer with gut issues. Maybe it's kind of here and there, but a lot of people with more severe, like functional gut issues, and it affects everything. I mean, your mental health, not only just your digestion, but your body composition. Some people have extreme weight loss. Some people gain a ton of weight, your overall confidence, of course, but everything is so interconnected with our gut, even our hormones, our thyroid, our brain. So when our gut is off, everything else is off in the body. So here I am sitting at this colorectal surgeon's office, and they're ready to like remove my entire large intestine. And I'm at the point, of where like, you're just willing to do whatever you need to get better. Like, you're so miserable at that point. And, we want to listen to the doctors that we go see. And something came over me in that moment though. And I don't know if it was like God, if it was my gut, but something just told me not to do the surgery. And that's what actually led me down the road of functional medicine that I do here today. Is I'm a functional medicine nutritionist, where I help people get to the root cause of their chronic health issues. And I started learning a lot about gut health. I started learning a lot about our gut microbiome, and if there's any kind of bacteria imbalances, how that can play a role, if there's a leaky gut. And a lot of my issues actually did come down to having a lot of microbiome or microbial imbalances in my gut. My gut was pretty inflamed. It was pretty leaky. But what's kind of unfortunate is when we go this traditional Western medicine route that I did, they don't often look at that. They don't often look at the gut microbiome. They don't look at all the different bacteria in your gut. What they'll do is, they'll rule out anything severe, which we need. We need those people. Don't get me wrong. We need to go to our doctors. We need to get those things checked out. But when it comes to a lot of these chronic issues that are oftentimes very lifestyle related issues, people are at a loss and they don't know what to do. They're usually just kind of given a Band-Aid to manage the symptoms. And that's what happened to me. So this kind of allowed me to take a deep dive, and I probably would never study as much about gut health and like bacteria in our gut if I didn't go through it myself. And it was literally, me saving like an entire organ. So I dove into learning everything that I could about the gut microbiome and how these little microbes in our gut play such a huge role in just our overall health. And it was through that I was actually able to get a lot of healing, because a lot of my issues came from stress, definitely a physical stress, but an emotional stress too. There was some hidden trauma. There was, of course, the overtraining when you're in bodybuilding and a very low body composition. And it's normally these combination of stressors. So dietary stressors, emotional, sometimes environmental type stressors that really wreak havoc first on our whole neuroendocrine system. So this is going to be first our adrenals. So we get large cortisol response. And, for the bodybuilding world, we know like cortisol can be very catabolic. So it means it breaks things down. But one thing that really takes a massive hit is our gut lining. So you can kind of think of it like bodybuilders. We do whatever we can to like maintain our skeletal muscle mass when we're dieting down to these extreme low levels of body fat. But our gut lining really, really does take a hit. And that's what actually can lead to things like a leaky gut. And if you guys have never heard of leaky gut before, basically we have these junctions that line our gut. Our gut's lining is only one cell layer thick. And if that gets weakened, damaged, or inflamed from maybe an inflammatory diet, whether it be from stress, overtraining, environmental factors, that can actually lead to a lot of these bacteria imbalances in the gut. It can lead to immune issues as well too, like autoimmune conditions. So first, I have a lot of these stressors playing a role in my gut. It makes sense now that my hormones were off, my thyroid was off as well too, because all of that's down regulated when we're in this very low metabolic place. And then my gut lining took this massive hit. And I don't know about you, if you've ever kind of tried to diet and the type of foods you pick, but when you're in the world of like fitness and bodybuilding, I was using like a ton of diet foods at the time. Mm-hmm. So I paid more attention to macros, which I always tell my clients, macros matter. We need to pay attention to them. We need to make sure we're getting enough protein. We need to kind of look at our carbohydrates and our fats, but we need to also look at like what our food is made out of. Yep. And I was using a ton of foods that were even like artificial foods, so full of sugar substitutes that feed bad bacteria in the gut. I was eating a lot of foods that just fit the macros that I was trying to aim for to get to a certain body composition. But I wasn't looking at food as information and how literally every single cell in our body is made from the food that we eat. And what's even more astonishing is it literally controls every action in our body. So that's really what led me down to the path of functional medicine, and looking at these things from more of like a gut microbiome standpoint. And I'll tell you, like, it didn't happen overnight. I've helped a lot of people now heal their guts just like I've healed mine. It's quite the process, but over time, I was able to heal my gut lining, reset my microbiome to the point where I didn't have to get my entire large intestine removed.
You're a great example of the human body and how we're created to heal as long as we do our job and remove the interference. So you had a lot of things interfering with your body and the way that it's designed to thrive. So you identified the interference, you removed the interference, and all of a sudden your body responded by healing itself. It's so interesting because I love hearing pain to purpose stories like yours.
Mhm.
And when I look back at my story, it's very similar with pain to purpose. And it's interesting when we look back in retrospect that we're given those mountains so we could show the world eventually that the mountains can be moved. So I believe when you were sitting there in your appointment and ready to go and do surgery and remove that large intestine, it was God, it was intuition, it was innate intelligence telling you maybe there's a different way. And now there was a different way, and now you're delivering that message to the rest of the world. So I think that's amazing. And also when we think about lifestyle symptoms and diseases, those should be treated with lifestyle changes. Doesn't that make sense, right? Surgeries and pills are medications and short-term substitutions, but it doesn't change the lifestyle. So you got to change the lifestyle. Let's stay on the topic, Rachel, of the gut. I want to focus more on it. We know people who are healthy and live a long life have more diversity in the gut.
Mhm.
People who have low diversity experience symptoms. They tend to have leaky gut. I would estimate that most Americans have some form of leaky gut.
Yeah.
So what are some of your favorite ways to increase the diversity inside of the gut?
Yeah, the first thing that we can do to increase diversity in the gut is going to be just through food in general. The more diverse our diet is, the more diverse our gut microbiome is going to be with the type of bacteria that we have in the gut. We actually do some gut microbiome testing here with my practice. And it's really, really interesting when we can look at these ratios of bacteria in the gut. And we look at these ratios of something called firmicutes to Bacteroidetes. And I don't know who comes up with these names.
Is that the gut zoomer that you use?
Yes, we use the gut zoomer with
Love
Vibrant.
that test. Yep, me too.
Yeah, and they've shown that when the ratio is greater than 0.9, with that diversity, that the bacteria can literally be making you gain weight. And before we even did this podcast today, I was looking at this study where they actually they took, I think, 77 pairs of twins, all of which that were obese, for the study. And what they found was that when they analyzed the bacteria between the obese twins and then the twins that were not obese, they found a completely different diversity in the gut microbiome. So they've actually shown that more diversity in our gut leads to more leanness, and it can actually help us with improved metabolic, our improved metabolism, greater levels of insulin sensitivity as well too. So something that I'm always trying to work on with my clients is increasing their diversity in their gut. The first thing that we can do is feeding the bacteria in the gut. So these are going to be different types of fibers. So humans can't digest fiber, but the bacteria in our gut can digest these fibers. So we call these prebiotics. So we can think like probiotics, they're good bacteria in the gut. And then what we feed them, these are going to be prebiotics. And then there are things that these bacteria produce. We call these postbiotics, which actually that gut zoomer tests for some different postbiotics. And some of the most well-known types of postbiotics are called short-chain fatty acids. There's things like propionate, butyrate, and there's been a lot of studies on these short-chain fatty acids also and how they play a role in body composition, how they can also help increase leanness, insulin sensitivity, reduce inflammation in the body, and they actually help increase the mucus that lines the gut, which can be very protective with preventing against anything like leaky gut. So I'd say the first thing that we can do is increasing more fibers in our diet, different types of prebiotics. So some great ones I've utilized are like green bananas. If people follow me on social media, I utilize quite a bit of green bananas, which they're very low in fermentation for a lot of bad bacteria in the gut. So people who even do what I call a low FODMAP diet, they can usually tolerate more green bananas than the overly ripe bananas that are more spotted, that have a bit more sugar in them. So this is a great type of prebiotic. Cooked and cooled starches. So we call these resistant starches. So like when we take a potato, We cook it, but we actually let it cool down. It creates some of these resistant starches that actually can feed some of these good bacteria in the gut. And then things like flax seeds, those are great prebiotics as well too. You can take prebiotics and sometimes they put them with some probiotics, but I like to get it from food because we can just increase the type of bacteria in our gut by changing up the types of fibers that we're eating. And then we can also get a lot of different probiotics from the food that we're eating. And when we're literally eating an avocado, you can kind of think of it like we're eating the microbiome from that avocado. So the more diversity in the foods that we have, the more types of fats that we have. These can be things like omega-3 fats coming from fatty cuts of fish, those avocados. These can be things like walnuts. All of these things will over time help increase more diversity in the gut microbiome. And I even know like bodybuilders like me, we tend to eat like a very much like, I think I eat like maybe 10 different foods, if that, even in my diet, which is hard. So you can easily kind of figure out a way to rotate some of your foods, rotate some of the fibers that you're eating. Sometimes when we're really busy, that can definitely be difficult, but I'm always just trying to rotate some of the fruits and the vegetables that I'm eating, trying to get in more fibers throughout my diet. And I'd say that's one of the best ways we can honestly work on our gut microbiome. The food is going to be the number one source of fuel for a greater diversity in our gut.
Agreed. And it's interesting because it hasn't been until the last maybe 50 years or so that we have this new problem of people eating the same foods over and over and over. Even though you did 10 foods or so as a bodybuilder, I would estimate that most people are around that same number. They stick to the same foods. And when you think about just nutrition and diets and keto and carnivore, I think keto is great. Of course, my company's Keto Kamp. I teach keto. My shirt says ketosis. However, I'm not somebody who says you got to do keto all the time, especially if you're sticking with the same keto foods. You're going to decrease the diversity of your gut. That's why I teach keto flexing. We introduce high healthy carbs. We do paleo. We do different approaches. It's the rotation of those foods that create those different species, different bacteria, diversity in the gut. So isn't it interesting that we have this new problem of people sticking with the same foods nowadays?
I want to pause this interview real quick and say thank you so much for reaching this point of the interview. If you're getting any value so far, hit the thumbs up button on this video down below and check out the subscribe button here on the channel. If you're not subscribed to the Keto Kamp YouTube channel as of yet, hit the subscribe button, hit the bell so you're notified when we go live, release a brand new video. We do that 2 to 3 times per week. I want to take a few seconds here to get to the sponsor of this episode, which is Upgraded Formulas. If you're anything like me, you probably spend quite an amount of money on supplements every single month. Wouldn't it be great if you knew you were absorbing those supplements or not absorbing those supplements? What I'm bringing you today is an exciting new opportunity to test the accuracy of the supplementation, the vitamins and the minerals, if they're actually doing what they're supposed to do. After all, you can't be a biohacker without testing, can you? In this case, I'm referring to Upgraded Formulas, upgraded hair test kit and consultation. It's very easy to do this test. It's a kit that's sent to you. You would just use hair from your body. It could be head, it could be body, it could be pubic hair. You send in your hair and then you get a consultation and you review which supplements you should be taking versus which supplements you shouldn't be taking. How well are you absorbing that? And this will be a great way to discover why you just don't feel so well. Even if you're taking all these supplements, but you still feel tired, you still have symptoms. This will give you the exact picture on what you should do next to correct that issue. I love Upgraded Formulas. I had Barton Scott on my podcast, the Keto Kamp Podcast, before. We have an exclusive offer for you to get 10% off your hair mineral analysis kit and any of their amazing supplements, which are highly absorbed. Head to upgradedformulas.com. Use the coupon code BEN10, that is BEN10, at checkout to get 10% off today. We will also drop a link down below for you. That's upgradedformulas.com. Use the coupon code BEN10. All right, let's get back to this incredible interview.
It is kind of hard because like we want to automate our food, right? As much as possible, because now we're all busier than we've ever been, and even when we're creating meal plans, like I'm a nutritionist and people want meal plans all the time. And it's, what are the foods that we can just rotate between? Can we eat to a strict meal plan? And that's what's hard about when we're following a meal plan is it's oftentimes not a lifestyle, and we don't know what to do when we stop eating off this meal plan. So it's so important to learn, the foods that are going to work best for your body. And sometimes it is following a meal plan for a short period of time. But at the end of the day, we really do need to learn how to eat and listen to our body as well too. Listen to our body's hunger cues. And what's unfortunate is most of the Western American diet, it's full of a lot of these, I like to call hyper palatable foods. They're the processed foods. They're full of a lot of sugars, even artificial sugars as well too, pro-inflammatory fats. And if we can kind of look at this from the other side as well. So like we know everything I just talked about, the fibers, a lot of diversity with your diet, healthy fats, proteins feed good bacteria, increase diversity. We can look at the standard American diet, the SAD diet, and say that actually does the opposite. It lowers diversity in the gut. It feeds bad bacteria. It increases inflammation in the gut, and it actually leads to things like leaky gut. And now we see all these metabolic issues, obesity, type 2 diabetes, and we can literally look at the microbiome of these people and see this low diversity going on. So it's oftentimes, yes, it's the good types of foods that we add in, but I think it's also too, avoiding a lot of these hyper palatable processed foods that really wreak havoc on our gut. Industrial seed oils, vegetable oils, sugar, just all of those things we could really do without.
Yeah, and you had a little post on your Instagram, actually a big post that did well, but what I'm saying is you had 7 gut destroyers, and you mentioned a couple sugar, vegetable oils. And but let's go a little bit deeper into each one of these, and I'll list them for you in case you forgot what you posted there. The first one was sugar, right? I mean, that's kind of obvious. Processed sugar, you're raising glucose and insulin. Anything else you want to add to that specifically?
Well, bacteria and pathogens feed off of sugar.
Candida, right? Yep.
Candida. So I've had a lot of people who come back with candida. They thrive off of sugar. A lot of other type of pathogenic bacteria, they thrive off of also sugar in the diet. We know it can also cause a lot of the blood sugar imbalances, increase in cortisol levels throughout the body as well too. It also just leads to overall obesity as well. And we know that can also wreak havoc in our overall gut microbiome. So Sugar, whether it's real or artificial, and I think that one's really, really tough for a lot of people to swallow because there's so many diet foods out there. And, I was the first one who had all of my pre-workouts, my protein powders. I was putting it in my coffees. And when I really look back and I look at it, it was like constantly throughout my day, like these were staples in my diet. Like first thing when I woke up in the morning, artificial sweeteners. Before I went to go work out, artificial sweeteners. When I got back from working out, artificial sweeteners. And if you look at the side effects of a lot of these things, sucralose, anything that ends in ose or ol, I always tell my clients to look for, you'll see side effects of bloating, distension, constipation, diarrhea, because just because there's not calories in them doesn't mean they're good for you. It doesn't mean they're still not feeding bacteria in your gut as well.
Amen. I saw a study that looked at, they were tracing where sucralose specifically ended up in the body. And they traced only 96.7% of it. So 3.3% was untraceable. Like, where the heck did that go? Is it accumulating somewhere in the body? There's also research that shows it could be insulinogenic for some people. It'll cause more cravings. It could be a neurotoxin. So those are bad. What are some of your favorite, not artificial sweeteners, but natural sweeteners? What are your go-tos?
Yeah, I'll usually have some of my clients utilize monk fruit, stevia, if it's actually stevia, because there's still a lot of processed stevia. Truvia is not stevia. I actually used to have a stevia plant in my backyard. And if you get real stevia, it's green. It's not going to be white and granular. It's not going to be in those little droplets as well too. So if we can get like real natural 0-calorie sweeteners, I'm okay with monk fruit or stevia. Those are going to be much better alternatives than things like sucralose.
Yeah, I agree. And next on the list of gut destroyers is vegetable oils, industrial seed oils. I talk a lot about this. I recently did a TikTok video a couple weeks ago about the worst cooking oils versus the best ones, and it just exploded. It has 3.3 million views. Somebody on a radio show heard the video from a friend, and then they brought me on the radio show yesterday to talk about it. So this is a topic I love, and I love that you talk about it. So why, Rachel, are these vegetable oils so bad for us, especially the gut?
Well, they just create massive inflammation throughout our entire body. It's probably the easiest answer for most
No,
people to
it's true.
hear.
Is it worse than sugar though? Are vegetable oils worse than sugar?
Yeah, because we can metabolize sugar. We
It's
can't
like,
really metabolize these industrial seed oils or vegetable oils from our body. So they just kind of stay stuck. And I run omega-3, omega-6 indexes on all my clients who come see me. And I will say about 9 out of 10 people are high in these omega-6s, these pro-inflammatory fats that typically come from vegetable oils, industrial seed oils, and most of the time they tell me, I don't cook with those though. I'm not like at home cooking with a vegetable oil. And I'm like, you're getting it. You're getting it from when you're going out to eat. You're getting it from, some maybe those processed foods, people who maybe aren't paying attention to like their salad dressings, commercially made salad dressings. You look at the back of them,
yeah.
they're, using vegetable oil. You think you're getting a nice healthy salad with all of these fibers and these veggies, and they throw on there some chicken breast, but then you're dousing it in a bunch of vegetable oil, and it just causes massive inflammation throughout the body.
Yeah, they're everywhere. They're ubiquitous. They're at Whole Foods. They're at most of your restaurants. What I do when I go to restaurants, it drives my fiance crazy sometimes, but I'm always asking the waiter or waitress, hey, which oil do you cook with at this restaurant? 98% of the time, it's like a soybean, canola, or even olive oil that's cut with one of those. And I tell them, look, I'm allergic. My fiance is allergic to those oils. Can you use a real olive oil or butter or coconut oil? And they usually have that option, but you have to request it. So good job. I love that you talk about that. I agree. Worse than sugar. You could burn off sugar. Can't burn these off. Next on the list is medications. What does that do to the gut?
Yeah, birth control, antacids, NSAIDs. They've shown that actually birth control can deplete the body of key micronutrients. It can affect your body's adrenals. I know when I was on birth control, when I would do my testing, my cortisol levels were at like 50. And I remember the physician I was seeing was like, I have never seen cortisol levels like this high ever. It came off of it, went back to normal, got back on it, was crazy high. And they were like, this birth control is just not good for your body. And that was one of the reasons why I ended up coming off of it. So yeah, birth control can wreak havoc in our gut microbiome, not only because of depleting the nutrients, but it can definitely cause an imbalance in a lot of that good and the bad bacteria as well too. NSAIDs, we know that can cause a breakdown in the gut lining, leading to more actual gastrointestinal inflammation, ulcers even for people as well too. And then the other one is antacids. Very rarely do I see people who have too little stomach acid. Usually they have actually too much stomach acid. And then we overuse these antacids, which is a little bit of a Band-Aid to suppress the symptoms that people are experiencing. But typically what I see is, when people don't have enough stomach acid, they can't break down protein very well. And this protein can actually even begin to rot a bit and create the symptoms of having more of like an acid reflux. So we start taking more of these antacids, and then this kind of continues the cycle. But we've also shown that a lot of these antacids, because they deplete a lot of our stomach acid, can actually cause more of these bad bacteria and pathogenic bacteria to enter into our gastrointestinal tract, because that stomach acid is needed kind of as a defense system as well too. Proton pump inhibitors, I think those are one of the worst things that people can get on for their gut microbiome. There's a very strong correlation between proton pump inhibitors and SIBO, so small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. And every client that I've seen who's come in with a proton pump inhibitor that they've been on, normally they've been on it for like years and they can't even get off of it anymore. And they used to even have a black box warning for proton pump inhibitors with doctors like, don't put people on it for longer than a week. Now people are just on them for life and they struggle to even get off of them, because everything's just like completely off when they do try, and they get way too much then stomach acid production. But these proton pump inhibitors also lead to a lot of bacteria overgrowth. So now not only do they have the stomach acid issue, they're now also dealing with a lot of this bacteria overgrowth in their small intestine as well.
Yeah, well said. So the next one on the list is stress. And we know you talked about it already, but stress comes in 3 areas: mental, emotional, physical, chemical. But what role does stress play on that gut?
Yeah, I'd say it plays a big role by causing us to be more in that catabolic state that I was talking about. So we're in that sympathetic state, fight or flight, our digestive system completely shuts down as well. So we're either going to hold on to all of our food or we're going to completely expel it. So when our digestive system is not really working because we're in this stress state, this can lead to a lot of that bacteria overgrowth as well, slow motility in the gut. And that over time can just lead to a lot of those microbial imbalances as well. So stress is normal. We're all going to experience stress. When you're working out, you're under a very short stressor. But this is more for people who are like chronically under stress every single day. Cortisol levels are always high. Their digestive systems are always shut down. And they're dealing with sometimes constipation, diarrhea. And that's when really that stress can lead to a lot of those functional gut issues.
Yeah, and stress is good. To your point, hormesis, hormetic stress. You have this hormetic ceiling, but everybody has a different ceiling. So you might add working out to a person who's already highly stressed out from different areas, and all of a sudden that curve drops and you start to get more symptoms. So everybody needs to know their hormetic curve and their hormetic ceiling, and then make sure you kind of stay in that zone, which is really interesting. So I love that. And then on the next topic here, or the next one on the list, is unresolved trauma, which can kind of be in that stress category. But you mentioned you had some unresolved trauma that you dealt with. So what are some strategies to deal with that?
Well, I will say first, they've shown that people who've gone through trauma actually have something called a low vagal tone. So we have something called our vagus nerve, which connects our brain all the way down to our gut. And this is why we have a gut-brain connection, and why when we go through periods of stress, our gut is affected, or even when our gut is off, we've seen it can definitely affect our neurological function as well too. So they've shown that people who have a history of trauma, especially unresolved trauma that they haven't really worked through, that actually can stay dormant in the body. And one of the ways that it's manifested is by a poor vagal tone, so poor gut-brain connection. And they've shown that a poor vagal tone is one of the number one causes for SIBO, or small intestinal bacteria overgrowth, as well too. So this is why working through, the things that maybe we've gone through our childhood trauma is really, really important. I've read the book, How to Do the Work, by the holistic psychologist. I'm a huge fan of her. She talks a lot about vagal tone, talks a lot about trauma, how to understand these trauma, because sometimes they're not even like major life events, but they're things that have really shaped the way that we think, have shaped the way we show up in relationships as well too. So I'm always encouraging my clients to do the work, work with a professional, whether that's working with a coach, whether that's going to see a psychologist, whether that's doing the work on their own to really try to understand how some of these emotional traumas could be playing a role in their overall health. And it's by no coincidence that usually most people who see psychologists or psychiatric physicians usually are dealing with IBS, gut issues, or even autoimmune conditions as well too, because our gut and our brain are so interconnected.
Yeah, well said. I got to read that book. I like her work too. I follow her on Instagram. There's also a good book, The Body Keeps the Score. Very similar.
I've heard of that one.
Yeah,
yes.
That's a classic. Sugar substitutes, we already spoke about that. We'll skip that, but let's get to the next one, dairy and wheat. So I'm assuming you're talking about cow dairy. And what are the issues with that and gluten?
Yeah, so, for people who already suffer with gut issues, most of us can't really break down lactose. And when we're a baby, we have the enzymes to break down lactose because we're drinking our mother's milk. But actually, when we get older, actually over half of the population loses those enzymes to even break down lactose. So one, we really can't digest it very well, which can oftentimes manifest by feeding different types of bacteria in our gut. So that's one way. So I usually try to do an elimination diet with a lot of people by removing dairy. It's also very fermentable to gut bacteria. So when people go on like a low FODMAP diet who suffer with irritable bowel syndrome, one of the first things that they pull out is lactose because it is fermentable. It's a disaccharide, and it can also feed some of that bacteria in our gut microbiome. Wheat. So I think gluten and wheat just wreaks havoc on our gut microbiome. It triggers a lot of gastrointestinal inflammation. They've shown that gluten specifically breaks down that gut lining and leads to things like leaky gut, intestinal permeability, which over time can affect our gut microbiome, even our neurological health as well too. So it's a pro-inflammatory food, and especially when it's hyper-processed as well. So I'd say, like, in terms of pulling out wheat and gluten from our diet, especially if you're someone who does suffer with gut issues, that's a really great place to start.
Yeah, great. Well said. And the last one here is raw diet. So what do you mean by that? Eating just a lot of raw vegetables, or what do you mean?
I'd say in particular, yes, raw vegetables. So a lot of roughage. So a lot of like raw broccoli. You can kind of think of it like a lot of the insoluble fiber. So like kind of think of it like an apple. It'd be the outside of the apple versus the soluble fiber would be more of the inside of that apple. If you're somebody who already has some gastrointestinal inflammation, it's going to kind of be like sandpaper in your gut as you're trying to digest some of those foods. So I'd say too much roughage can not be so good for the gut microbiome. And it's really, really hard for your body to really break down a lot of those foods. So we do need to cook our foods. There are some foods that we don't need to cook that don't have a whole lot of that insoluble fiber in it, that whole lot of that roughage, but you're not going to want to sit and eat like a bunch of like raw Brussels sprouts. It's going to be really, really hard for your gut to break that down. So we need to kind of help it out, make sure we're chewing our food. They actually say that our food should be the consistency of baby food before we swallow it.
I got work to do on that.
I don't know, but yeah, I definitely don't. And most of us don't chew our food probably enough, but that's also why it is important to make sure our food is, already in a place where it's going to be easily digestible as well. Fermented foods are actually kind of pre-digested as well. So if you're somebody who has gut issues, you can always try adding in some fermented foods, sauerkrauts. Some people can tolerate yogurts, even though there's some dairy in it, but you can actually get some lactose-free fermented yogurts, kefir, that some people tolerate. I kind of think it's very independent to that person though, of course. But adding in some fermented foods is a great way to also get some of these pre-digested foods, but also they're good bacteria that you can add to your gut microbiome.
Yeah, and you could always have like sheep yogurt or a goat yogurt. Those are much more safer than cow. I agree. And, if you have leaky gut and if you have autoimmune disease and you're eating a lot of these raw spinach, raw kale, high oxalate, anti-nutrient vegetables, that might also be an issue. So yeah, by cooking them, steaming them, that could break down some of those oxalates and anti-nutrients. So I like that. That's a great idea. So on the topic of the gut, we covered a lot there. And I know that my podcast is primarily focused on keto and fasting. So everything that Rachel just spoke about can be applied to keto and fasting. Case in point to what you said is I have some of my students inside of my Keto Kamp Academy. Sometimes they'll hit a weight loss plateau 2 months in, 3 months in, and I'll either tell them, hey, time to start flexing out of ketosis, or if you find yourself, I'll ask them, what do you eat on a daily basis? And they usually stick with the same 8 to 10 foods like you were doing, all keto friendly. I say, okay, let's switch your 8 to 10 keto foods that you're eating right now to 8 to 10 different keto foods. And just by doing that, they'll break through a weight loss plateau because they'll change their bacteria ratios to what you were saying earlier. So any last things on the gut before we transition to a new topic here?
I would say just that like gut health is one of the most important things that we are becoming much more well versed in. I was actually researching a little bit before our podcast here today, and I don't know if you've dove into learning about Akkermansia at all, but it's a type of bacteria that resides in our gut, and they actually look for it on the gut zoomer. But so fascinating. They've actually done a few different studies with looking at Akkermansia and how that actually can play a role with helping people also with insulin sensitivity, losing weight. And they actually were supplementing people with Akkermansia in terms of a probiotic. And I think they increased their fat loss from about 3 to 4% body fat in just
Yeah.
6 weeks by supplementing with things like archimania. So it's just like the power of our gut microbiome. And I'll say it's so much more than just calories in and calories out. I don't know how many times I've heard just eat less and work out more. And
That's
I've seen,
crazy for a fitness person to say that, Rachel. Oh my gosh.
I know. And trust me, I used to think that way
Me too. Me too.
until, right, but then why is it that like so many people, struggle to lose weight? I've had so many of those clients who are following the right macros, who are doing the work, but they just can't make progress. And sometimes it can come down to literally things like our gut microbiome. So I'd say if we can focus on having a healthy gut microbiome, everything else will fall into place.
Yeah, and you know what else helps increase acromantia is the way I said it. I don't know if you're saying it right or if I'm saying it wrong, but one of us is saying it wrong and right. Fasting. Fasting has actually been known to stress the gut and actually build acromantia, or however you say it. So super fascinating. And it's interesting that you've come a long way, because I'm like you. I used to believe calories in versus calories out. And we're not calorie deniers. Of course, calories are important, but there's more important things out there. I should say calories matter, but there are more important things other than the calories. I interviewed a gentleman recently, a colleague of mine, Dr. Don Klum. He shared research with me that people who are happier burn more calories on a daily basis than people who are depressed. People who have different gut bacteria, to your point, burn more calories than people who don't have that specific or not enough of that bacteria. So it's just a huge distraction, and it confuses the person, and it's not getting to the root cause of why they're not getting well. So I love that. Next topic is something that you're well versed in, and that is protein, muscle, longevity. I used to have a stance on protein a couple years ago that we want to limit the protein, make sure you don't have too much, focus on fat. Too much will kick you out of ketosis. And I have since changed my stance. Now, in the beginning, I focus on fat, but then after a person gets into ketosis, I have them actually take down the fat and prioritize protein. I think protein is the number one thing we should prioritize. I know you're a big fan of protein. So why is protein so important? Why is building lean muscle mass important for longevity? Oh, you're muted. Hold on. There we go.
Okay,
oh, wait. Okay, there you go. I hear you now. You're good.
Is that good?
Yeah.
Okay. I don't even think I clicked anything.
It's all good.
We can cut that part out.
Yeah, we'll cut it out.
Okay, so I'll first start with just like the thermic effect of food with protein in general. And the thermic effect of food basically just means how many calories we utilize in the digestive process of these foods. So protein actually has a 30% of the thermic effect of food, versus carbohydrates is about 5 to 10%, depending on how much fiber is in it. Fat is about 0 to 3%. So if our goal is fat loss just by having a high protein diet in general, we are going to burn more fat in the process. Protein is also very satiating. It makes us feel full. It makes it feel satisfied. Also, we see protein also in combination with fats typically in nature. And when we combine protein with fats, it adds to a lot of satiety. I've never eaten a steak and then been like, oh my gosh, like I'm so hungry and eating more. You'll eat that steak and you'll enjoy it until you feel full and you feel satisfied. Now, give someone a bunch of carbohydrates, give them like things like popcorn that don't have adequate proteins, even some of those healthy fats, we will literally override our body's hunger cues and keep eating it. So the first thing is the thermic effect of food, just with protein in general. We're going to burn more in just that overall digestive process. We feel more satiated. We feel more full and satisfied when we eat protein. But protein is incredibly important for our skeletal muscle mass. And I think that's the number one reason why protein is so important. And coming from the bodybuilding world, we tend to look at muscle as just, physique. It's the way we look. We have a bigger booty. I was all for the booty building. It's for having that 6-pack abs, or it's just for locomotion. But skeletal muscle mass does so much more than just locomotion. It literally helps us with glucose disposal. So if you're someone who has high insulin, we need to increase our skeletal muscle mass. And normally what I see with the epidemic of obesity, it's not always that person has too much fat. It's often that they're under muscled. So it's really an epidemic of low skeletal muscle mass that we are dealing with. And when we don't have adequate skeletal muscle mass, we have higher levels of blood sugar, higher levels of insulin. And the skeletal muscle mass also helps keep inflammation low throughout the body. So we can also say that muscle is anti-inflammatory. And if we look at the number one reason why people end up in nursing homes, it's for sarcopenia. So it's for
Yeah.
loss of skeletal muscle mass. So we need to stop honestly looking at this as too much fat, too much calories. We need to start looking at it as, okay, what is the quality of the food? Are we getting adequate protein? Are we emphasizing having more skeletal muscle mass? And I think that kind of goes into, are we looking at this from what's the problem, but what's the solution? The solution honestly is emphasizing more of these right types of foods, having higher quality protein, increasing skeletal muscle mass throughout the body. And that's going to fix a lot of issues, because I can help somebody lose fat who has good skeletal muscle mass. What is so hard to do is when I get a client who comes in and they're 15 pounds deficient in skeletal muscle mass. It's usually like a woman who's like in age 50, she's postmenopausal, she's had a very low calorie, low protein diet, has done zero resistance training. And yeah, she has some extra fat on her body and she's like, help me lose weight. And what she really needs to do is focus on building some skeletal muscle mass to fix the issue. So it's not a problem that she's really over fat. It's really a problem often that we're under muscled.
Well said. What is your recommendation for protein? I know it'll depend on your age and different factors, but in general, what do you recommend for protein daily?
I typically do 1 gram per pound of lean body mass, but I've also spoken with Dr. Gabrielle Lyon,
Yep.
and she is the expert when
She
it
is.
comes
She's
to
wonderful.
what we call muscle-centric medicine. And she tends to emphasize 1 gram per pound of ideal body weight, which can actually be a little bit of a higher intake of protein in the diet as well too. So I'd say anywhere around then, but if you're aiming for at least 1 gram per pound of lean body weight, if you're aiming for 1 gram per pound of ideal body weight, you're going to be roughly in that right range.
Awesome. Now, next question is this. What is more important, Rachel, a physical six pack or a mental six pack?
I will say definitely a mental six pack for sure, because having a six pack, I will say that was also the point in my life where I felt the most empty. And I think sometimes it takes us having to get the thing that we think will make us happy to realize that it's really not about the thing, but it's about who we are. It's about how we show up. It's about doing the work. It's about, you know, being the best version of ourselves mentally, physically. And you know what? If part of that is having a six pack, that's great. But I think it's always about being that best version of yourself. Seeing what your body is capable of is great, but always doing things that are going to promote your overall mental health and well-being. So I will always go back to, yeah, definitely mental six pack for sure.
Agreed. 100%. Being in the online world like you, having big platforms, I know you see it like I do. There's a lot of people out there who are very hateful with comments. Nasty comments come in from time to time. I see it often. So I want to hear kind of your thoughts on how maybe you used to handle that. Maybe those comments kind of penetrated you, and you would be sad about that, or you would respond, versus where you are today, and a hateful comment comes in. How did you used to respond to them, and then how do you respond to them today?
Yeah. So I used to take it quite hard, when you have a large social media following, which I have about 250,000 people who follow me online. And honestly, most of the people who began following me followed me for Rachel Scheer, six pack ads. But you get a lot of people who do like to put you down, they like to criticize you. And what I've learned is it's usually not about me. It's usually not about the person who's being criticized, but it says more about them. And honestly, like people can, shame, they can talk, they can say all these things, but when you are living your God-given potential, when you're standing up for the things that you believe in, there is nobody else that can make me feel bad for the things that I do on a day-to-day basis. So for now, how I show up is I look at those people as like, that says more about what they're going through, what they're having to walk through. And honestly, when we judge other people, it says more about them than it does say about us. So being in the world of social media, being in the spotlight, it is something that we see quite a bit. People who want to put you down, people who want to criticize you, but you have to know undoubtedly who you are and what you stand for. And if you do, I mean, that's something that nobody else can take away from you. And I know that I get to wake up every single day and literally live my purpose through what I do. I get to live my purpose through helping people with nutrition. I get to help people get to the root cause of their chronic health concerns. So even like the naysayers can't even hinder me from showing up and doing the things that I love.
That's a great answer. And I asked you that question because I wanted the audience to hear that and relate it to their own journey. When somebody starts to do keto or do intermittent fasting, or they're making changes in general, the people who don't change, they're a threat now, or you are a threat to the people who are not changing. It kind of points a mirror to them, and it could be a family member, a friend. But when you're confident, like Rachel is, it's because you're competent and you've studied and you understand it and you're living your purpose, like Rachel just said. So for those changing their health habits, changing their ways, and you see those comments come in, whether it's a social media comment or a family member in person, just keep living yourself, your purpose, and living on purpose with that purpose, and just let it deflect off of you. It says more about the person than it does about you, and nobody's living your life. And the truth of the matter is that the number one regret of people on their deathbed, according to a great book, The Top 5 Regrets of the Dying, is not living a life true to your purpose, but living a life of what others expected of you. We don't want that. So great answer. And I love your story, and we didn't talk about this earlier, but when I was studying you, I came across a really interesting fact that when you were starting to educate people on nutrition, you did whatever it took, meaning you actually went to Starbucks and you would lecture clients at Starbucks, right?
Oh, yeah.
Where did that whatever it takes mindset come from? Did you get it from your parents, or how did you adopt that?
Yeah. I like to say I was like a born entrepreneur.
I wasn't. I was not.
Even when I was like a kid, you'll see pictures of me. Like in Minnesota, instead of having a lemonade stand, I had like a fishing worm stand where I literally would always get resourceful. So I think honestly, since I was a kid, it was always like make do with what I had. And when I actually began to help people with nutrition, like on my own, I started off in the clinical for a while, but I like actually wanted to do one-on-one coaching with people. The first, like you said, when I started, it was in a Starbucks. And people they saw me, they saw that like I was living, breathing example for what I stand for, what I do. And honestly, that's where a lot of my clients have come from. They're like, this girl's got it figured out. She's got the body, she's got the mindset. And, that's the greatest compliment that I can ever get. So I would get people to come up to me and they'd be like, Rachel, can you help me, with fitness? Can you help with nutrition? And this was before I was even in the world of functional medicine or doing any of that. And I was just like, well, sure. I don't have like a whole practice. I don't have even an office space or anything, but let's just go meet at Starbucks. So I started to meet people at Starbucks, and I started just to give them really, really great results. And I just tried to add as much value as I could. Well, guess what? That person referred to another person, and now I have more clients and I'm having more Starbucks meetings. And like, before you know it, I'm just literally having a whole office space in Starbucks. They're going to start charging me here now. So it was at that point where I was like, okay, I probably should get an office space. And I actually just started renting an office space out of a law firm, even for a while, that I had family friends with who who owned that office space. So I just started with what I had. And I think oftentimes we wait for everything to be perfect. We wait for the perfect office. We wait for the practice. We wait for everything to be perfect before we start. And how often do we see that in weight loss as well too? We
Yeah.
see like, okay, I have this vacation coming up. I have this coming up. I'm going to start. And then I'm going to start with my weight loss journey. And then I'm going to start getting healthy. But there is never the right time. I promise you that. You just have to get started. You just have to go for it. The same thing happened with me with my business. The same thing happens when it comes to losing weight. You literally just have to get started. And honestly, you don't have to have all of the puzzle pieces together. They will fall into place. And when I think we are stuck with a decision of where to go, like if I could give anybody advice who's listening, like just pick one and go, because you will be redirected to the right way that you're supposed to go. And maybe it's the wrong direction and you're redirected. But the worst thing we can ever do is sit still and just wait.
Ah, well said. It's better to go in the wrong direction because you're moving than it is to sit still. Brian Tracy calls it someday island, right? Someday I'll do this. One day I'll do this. That's where all the hopes and dreams are crushed. Perfectionism is just a fancy word for procrastinator. You get started and you figure it out the rest of the way. I remember Bob Proctor, one of my mentors, said, jump off the cliff, metaphorically, and you'll develop the wings along the way. That's when you actually are forced to figure things out like you did, Rachel. How important is it to hire a coach to help guide you on where you need to go?
I think we should all have a coach. If there's anything you want to truly excel in, you should work with an expert. I've had a coach for like just overall life coach when it comes to relationships. I've had a business coach. I've had my own health coach as well too. I'm someone where I want to continuously learn. And if I see someone who's doing it better than me, I want to learn from that person. Because it will save you time and money in the long run. I think oftentimes we look at it as just that cost. It's that exchange. I'm paying this person this much money and then I'm getting X in exchange, but we don't look at it as an investment. And you are the greatest investment you can ever make. The clients who I've helped, in that 4-month period, transform their health, get rid of sugar addiction, lose the weight, maybe not be at the perfect place they want to be yet, but the mental transformation, the confidence that they make, it literally impacts every area in their life. They're making more money, their relationships is better, and they've made this a lifestyle. It just wasn't a fad diet or a quick fix. And all of my clients have been like, this is the most incredible investment that I've ever done for myself. But I think too often we look at it as just that cost, as that exchange system. So it's like, do we have a cost mindset or do we have an investment type mindset? Because you are the only investment that you can ever make that will continue to give back to you again and again and again. So I'm all for having a coach, whether it be for any area of your life that you want to grow and improve in.
Amen. I have several coaches as well. And you said it, it's not an expense, it's an investment. And it's the best investment that you could ever make. You take decades of learning and you turn that into days. How else can you do that, right? A coach is how you can do that. And if your coach does not have a coach, that's a red flag. Make sure your coach has a coach. That's important too.
Yep.
I want to thank you, Rachel, for coming on the podcast, for the amazing work. Shout out to our mutual friend, Kaylee, who connected us, and she's doing amazing things. So I'm grateful for that. You have an awesome podcast, Scheer Madness Podcast, but where else can the listeners go check you out?
You guys can follow me on Instagram. That's where I have my largest platform. It's at Rachel Scheer. You can check out my practice, which is at Rachel Scheer Nutrition. I have 2. And then if you want to learn a little bit more about my coaching, just visit rachelscheer.com. So it's all my name, keeping it easy.
Yeah, keeping it straightforward. We'll put all that in the podcast notes below. So we actually have a podcast notes person. Her name is Rachel too. So Rachel, the other Rachel, will put this together for everybody. Name. Yeah, it's a great name. So thank you for how you show up in this world and being so authentic and raw and sharing your story. And I'm grateful for our collaboration and also for future collaborations. So thank you so much, Rachel.
Yeah, thank you so much.